Thomas Kissinger here. We're coming to you from beautiful Breckenridge, Colorado. We came out here to the mountains to do some climbing, some hiking, some sightseeing and all that, and it's such a privilege to be here. The mountain peaks belong unto God, and we're just loving it being here. I wanted to start a new series with you called The Purpose of Resurrection. It's so important that we understand this. Man is spirit, soul, and body. And that really represents our full and total salvation, to be justified, to be sanctified, and ultimately to have a glorified body. And Jesus died and he rose from the dead. And he is the pattern Son of God, and he has laid down this pattern, and we must understand that full salvation will ultimately include the redemption of our body. So, having said that, we have to understand the importance of resurrection. And so Dr. Stephen Jones has written this work, The Purpose of Resurrection. So let's begin to go through this and start this incredible new series here in the mountains. What is resurrection? The scriptures as a whole find their focus upon Jesus. The hope of all mankind from the beginning to the end rests upon him and his work and ministry. Thus, it is self-evident that the concept of resurrection in both the Old Testament and the New should be defined and understood in terms of Jesus' resurrection. Whatever one says about resurrection, where one is raised from the dead to immortality, Jesus' resurrection is the only real pattern that we have. All other patterns, while helpful, are limited, because those raised from the dead later died as mortals. The pattern of Jesus' resurrection. So let's look at that here. The first and most important pattern is that Jesus was raised bodily from the tomb. The disciples came to the tomb to look for him, but he had risen. The resurrection was not the same thing as his ascension or going to heaven. It was a physical, literal event, as he said, Matthew 28:6. In other words, when Jesus talked of the resurrection prior to that time, he meant to convey the literal meaning of the term, not a spiritual event in the sense that some take it. The only real question is, with what body do they come? 1 Corinthians 15:35. Is the resurrected body physical or spiritual? The answer is both. He had a heavenly father and an earthly mother, and the resurrected body was the culmination of that relationship. He could enter the spiritual dimension, heaven, or the physical earthly dimension at will. His Father had given him all authority in both realms. Even as he said in Matthew 28:18, all power or authority is given unto me in heaven and in earth. As a result, he could vanish or appear suddenly in the room, like a spirit. On the other hand, he could also take on a physical form, where the disciples could touch him and see the wounds of his crucifixion. He could also eat food with the disciples. The question of whether Jesus was merely a spirit or if he had physical characteristics is faced and answered squarely in Luke 24:36 through 43. And it says, and as the disciples thus spoke, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said unto them, peace be unto you. But they were terrified and frightened, and supposed that they had seen a spirit. And he said unto them, why are you troubled, and why do thoughts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit has not flesh and bones, as you see me have. And when he had thus spoken, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they yet believed not for joy and wondered, he said unto them, have you here any meat? And they gave him a piece of a broiled fish and of a honeycomb. And he took it and did eat before them. So Jesus went out of his way to prove to them that he was not a spirit and that he had flesh and bones. He showed the disciples his physical scars, which no spirit would have. Then he asked for something to eat. A spirit cannot eat physical food. Most commentators point out the fact that Jesus said nothing about having blood. He only spoke of flesh and bones. While this is certainly true, the greater truth that he was raised with a physical body is often overlooked. And yet this is Luke's prime focus in the passage above, because it was the main truth that Jesus was revealing to the disciples at that moment. This is not to say that Jesus was limited by his flesh to the physical world. The marvel of the moment was that Jesus, though physical, could move just as freely in the spiritual dimension as well. He was not limited to the spirit world, nor was he limited to the physical world. He had free access to both because, as we have already pointed out, he had all authority in both heaven and earth, the spiritual and physical realms. So let's stop there for now, but this is very important that we begin to understand all of this. In order for Jesus to accomplish full salvation for mankind, spirit, soul, and body, all of this was necessary. It wasn't enough for Jesus to just die on the cross, stay in the spirit realm, and then just come back as a vision or a spirit and just say, you're forgiven and you can be saved through me, and when you die, you'll just go back to spirit and live forever in the spirit world. No, because that's not the plan of God. The plan of God in our full salvation is what Jesus said, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And it is for the sons of God to take over the earth and to rule and reign with Jesus Christ, and for there to ultimately be a restoration of all things. But you can't be on the earth without a body, and our bodies need to be saved also. So you ask the question, why did Jesus rise from the dead? Everything that he did was for us and as us. He rose so that we can rise. And it's so important that we must see that. He rose so that we can rise one day with a glorified body, an immortal body. And when he said, I have all power in heaven and in earth, the only reason he could say that was because he rose from the dead. He rose from the dead. He conquered death, hell, and the grave. And he has laid out this pattern for us. So this is all really exciting news, but it is so important that we get into the nuts and bolts of this, because so many people, so many Christians in today's world, they don't understand the purpose of resurrection. They don't understand that there's going to be then, even for humanity, a first resurrection and a second general resurrection after that. But it all hinges off of Jesus' resurrection. And Paul spent a great deal of time talking about this in 1 Corinthians 15. So we will pick up next time where we left off.